Welcome, everybody. I am Elizabeth Dartnell, the Executive Director of the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, and I am so delighted to open this webinar on the launch of SVRI's new grant called the SVRI Research Grant Knowledge for Action to End Violence Against Women and Violence Against Children. We have a super lineup of brilliant speakers for you today to share with you our new call for grants. Our speakers include Dr. Chichi Undi, Chair of the SVRI Board, Co-Chair of the SVRI Leadership Council, Chair of the SVRI Grant Selection Committee, and Senior Associate of the Population Council's Reproductive Health Program in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you, Chichi, for joining us. We also have a very special friend of the SVRI, Enrica Duncan, Deputy Director and Director of Mapa do Acavalhamento in Nosas, Brazil, and a former SVRI grant winner. And of course, we have Angelica Pino, SVRI's grants manager. And the webinar is going to be followed by a skills building session led by Professor Heidi Stockel, professor at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, and a member of the SVRI Leadership Council. Just before we start, some housekeeping. As you are all very familiar with Zoom, I won't go into Zoom, but we are using Zoom for this platform. We would love all of you who have joined us to please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you are coming from. And if you have any questions about anything that you hear today, please post them in the chat. And if we don't get to all the questions due to time, we will follow up with all of you by email with those questions that haven't been answered. So I'm going to just talk you through the brief agenda that we have for you today. I'm going to just start with providing some background on our grant making, after which I'm going to hand over to Chi-Chi, who will talk about what we are looking for in proposals and our principles around grant making, and we'll chat with Enrica about her experiencing of being an SVRI grant winner. We'll end with Angelica, who will talk about the current call and answer, of course, any of the questions that come up in the chat. And the webinar, as I've already mentioned, is going to be followed by a skills building session led by Heidi. And we're really excited about this. It's something new we haven't done before. So please do stick around for that. And then finally, do remember to post any questions in the chat, and welcome to you all. So now to SVRI grant making over the years. First, just a brief introduction to the Sexual Violence Research Initiative. We were established in 2003 as a part of an initiative working to address the deep inequities between high-income countries and lower middle-income countries called the 1090 gap, where less than 10% of the worldwide resources were devoted to health research and are put towards health in lower middle-income countries, where over 90% of all preventable deaths are occurring worldwide, which of course is unacceptable, and we are working hard to disrupt that. As such, we work to increase research and research resources on violence against women and violence against children in low and middle income countries to ensure that the programs and the policies being developed are evidence-based, but also identified and led by researchers based in low and middle income countries. We do this according to our strategy through building evidence, strengthening capacity, promoting partnerships, and influencing change. And every 2 years, and this time 3 years, we host the event in our field where people come together to learn, share, and connect, the SVRI Forum 2022. So now just a little bit of a brief background to our grant making. The SVRI has been grant making in many different ways since 2012, but in 2013, we formally launched the SVRI grant. And in 2015 and 2020, we created a pooled fund in partnership with the World Bank Group, where we jointly funded the SVRI World Bank Group Development Marketplace Awards. And then last year, we proudly launched the SVRI grant, this new grant that we're sharing with you today, Knowledge to Action to End Violence Against Women and Children in Lower Middle Income Countries. It is a pooled fund between SVRI, Wellspring Philanthropic Fund, and CEDAR. During this time, over these 9 to 10 years of grant making, and with our partners, we have awarded over 78 grants, dispersing over $8.3 million US, really working to advance knowledge and build knowledge and evidence for improved practices and response. And we'd really deeply like to thank our funding partners for helping us to do this. So where have our grants been allocated by region? The SVRI really cares deeply about ensuring that there is a diversity of grants across regions. And we do that unapologetically. We think it's really important that we ensure that resources reach all regions around the world. And we're doing our best to ensure that spread. And over the years, we have 30% of our grants being awarded in Africa, 22% in Latin America and the Caribbean, 13% in Southeast Asia, and 11% in East Asia Pacific, 12% in MENA, and 8% in Europe and Central Asia. So we still have a lot of work to do to be building up some of those less represented regions, but we're doing that and we're working hard to get these calls out to researchers living and working and doing research in regions that aren't well represented in the graph that you see before you. My final slide, what are some of the impacts of our grant making? I'm going to leave the slide up of the voices of grantees and just talk to you about some of the impact that the grant has made on some of our grantees. We asked some of our grantees what they thought the impact was. 87% of grant winners said that they had applied for additional research funding and were able to successfully leverage their receipt of an SVRI grant to acquire more funding. And some of our grantees call it their golden grant, so they've been able to get additional funds to really advance their research and practice work to ensure that they are doing really great research and also to dig deeper into the data that they have and undertake things like secondary data analysis, add on additional arms to the research that's already underway. They also spoke about how important it is for them to share widely the research outputs across a wide variety of different platforms and audiences through conference presentations, policy briefing notes, working with policymakers and practitioners to inform and improve programming. And this is really essential to ensure the research that you do really makes an impact on the lives of women and girls in low and middle income countries. 92% of the surveyed award winners reported forging relationships with local government agencies, practitioners, universities, and other researchers. And these development of trusting relationships is a really essential step to ensuring the dissemination use of your research findings. And all of the grant winners said that they believe that their work has made or will make a difference to the evidence base of gender-based violence research, policy, and practice. So thank you very much. So now I'm going to hand over to Chi to talk about what we like to see in applications and to discuss with Enrica about her experience of being an SVRI grant winner. Over to you, Chi.
Thank you, Liz, and hello to everyone from all over the world from what I can see in the chat box. We'll start out by talking about the actual principles that guide the SVRI's grant making. And the first thing I think is really important to point out is that the SVRI really privileges a feminist approach. In other words, it's really important to the SVRI to support work that challenges power imbalances in society, but also work that is really grounded in women's realities and that really strives to achieve structural change. So that's really of paramount importance. But in addition, the SVRI has a very strong emphasis on ethics. So the research needs to be ethical. Research needs to be conducted, first of all, according to the highest ethical and safety standards. And it's beyond mentioning that a research proposal is going to end up going through institutional review board processes and so on and so forth, and that ethical review clearances will be obtained. It's about, really thinking about how does the proposal that I've put together, what kinds of ethical issues does this proposal raise, and in what ways have we proactively thought about addressing these ethical issues that we've anticipated. So it's really key. It's not just superficial or cosmetic. It's really ethics and being ethical in the deepest sense. But there's also a focus on being innovative. Innovation is extremely important. A fresh idea, I think, is something that will really capture the SVRI's attention. Fresh ideas, fresh methodologies, innovative partnerships, ways in which, one sort of looks at a research idea and says, wow, I hadn't thought about that before or heard about that before in the field. Those are the kinds of things that are of great interest to the SVRI. Obviously, it's important for whatever idea that one comes up with to be evidence informed. So in other words, there's a need to have built up the idea from within the literature so that it's clear why this is actually a gap or why this is actually important as an idea. And furthermore, there is really, the SVRI looks out for collaboration in all the various ways that you can think about it. The processes of the partners within funding, a sort of funding proposal, they need to be explicitly collaborative. And we're talking about not just partners, but sectors as well, partnerships across sectors wherever it's possible, and partnerships, collaborations across disciplines, wherever that makes sense. It's always really good to see. And then of course, diversity is also a big thing. Because the SVRI is very committed to bringing in diverse voices from low and middle income countries, as you can see from one of the slides that Liz presented, there really is that drive to try and ensure that regions that are underrepresented sort of have a voice and are brought to the table as well. In addition, when we think about diversity, it's in terms of ensuring that there are diverse populations engaging within a particular initiative, whether that has to do with researchers, survivors, or other marginalized groups. And of course, there's an emphasis on gender equality. Finally, one of the guiding principles when it comes to the grant making of the SVRI has to do with research being actionable. It's really not research for the sake of it. The SVRI is really keen to support research that they can do something with, that the field can do something with, rather than research just for the sake of it. Especially because issues of violence against women and violence against children are much too serious for the field not to generate actual solutions. So it's important to be able to showcase that. So given these principles, I think the next slide will not be too much of a surprise. Next slide on what it is that the SVRI likes to see in proposals. The SVRI likes to see research that is going to advance knowledge on violence against women and violence against children. In other words, there are all kinds of wonderful research ideas that one could put together on these topics. But the question is, does this idea push the envelope in terms of where we are as a field? Is it saying something more that we haven't heard before? Is it helping the field to advance? That's one of the things that we do like to see. Is the proposal informed by current evidence and by local partners? There really is a strong emphasis on ensuring that there is leadership, local leadership demonstrated within the proposal. And if possible, the actual leading organizations should be based in LMICs. Again, multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral, and so on and so forth, and actual consortia being put together, because that again highlights the fact that it's a partnership, it's a collaboration. Those are the kinds of things that are attractive and appealing. I talked a bit already about ethical issues, not just having a sentence talking about how we will seek ethical approval, but actually anticipating what those ethical issues are and being really thoughtful about it and putting together a robust plan for addressing the many ethical issues that we know do arise when we do this work. Research uptake is also really key. Again, going back to the point that it's not research for the sake of it, but it's research, it's really beyond collecting data in order to have a great publication, which is part of research uptake. But the SVRI really wants to push this a bit further to say, what's left behind when the research is done? How do those that we worked with take this up and sort of institutionalize the work that has been brought about as a result of the grant? And budgets are important too. The budgets need to be logical. They need to be sound. There are sometimes some very obvious red flags. I know sometimes in proposal reviews, maybe the focus is more on the technical aspect, and if that is wonderful, then the budget doesn't matter so much because we're so eager to fund the work. But that's not the case with the SVRI. It's really about ethical funding. making sure the budget is sound, the budget is reasonable, the budget is fair, and we're taking into account the just collaboration between partners. And then lastly, a well-written abstract always helps. For any reviewer that's reviewing a stack full of proposals, a well-written abstract will always stand out and sort of give the impetus to read even further. And that's all from me. I think I'll just end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gigi. I'm going to hand over to Enrica to talk about your research work, and then Chi will ask you some questions. So over to you, Enrica.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm going to just share my screen here, so I need a couple of seconds for this. I'm very glad to be with you all as a former grantee of SVRI, and hoping that you guys all have the experience that we've had here in Brazil with the support of the SVRI. I'm going to just show a short video of our work. We have 90 seconds. 90 seconds to remind you of the feeling that surrounds every woman when one of us suffers violence. We have all experienced the taste of impotence. This feeling was responsible for the emergence of a beautiful and sensitive solidarity network. The will to help break the cycle of violence and bring back a chance to heal made Mapa do Acolhimento possible. We believe that access to mental health and justice are the first steps for women in vulnerability to rebuild their lives, their self-esteem, their confidence, their financial autonomy, and their protagonism. As soon as we launched the platform, psychologists and lawyers from all over the country raised their hands to say, "I can help." Mapa do Acolhimento runs a mission, supporting women who need care through volunteers willing to help. In under 90 seconds, an automatic geolocalization tool connects a volunteer with a woman at risk. These seconds impact a lifetime. This match not only saves, but changes life. So this is just a short description of the work that we've been doing here in Brazil, and we've been together with the SVRI since 2019 to 2020. We applied in 2019 in a pre-COVID era to what would be our first research grant, actually. We are practitioners here. We work with social impact in terms of gender-based violence. And we understood this as an opportunity to reflect and think about the impacts that we've been having. Something that showed up for us was the interest of the SVRI in the impacts that we were consolidating, but the knowledge that it would bring back. The knowledge that it would bring back to our organization, to the work that we've been doing, how to improve our intervention, and how to improve the field as a whole. So this reflected throughout our application process. I came up with a couple of findings and structures from what we've done with the SVRI grant in 2020, 2021. Part of it was to conduct an actual research for the first time for us. And it came in terms of an ethnographic research and in-depth interviews with the beneficiaries of our service, a cross-reference with the volunteers that had been working with us. And this brought out lots of findings, including the capacity to determine the social demographics of our work, as well as the understanding that beneficiaries actually felt stronger and more resilient through the service. So this gave us a lot of confidence, confidence that left us from a world of percentages into a world of actual quotes. And we could find this balance between quotes and percentages that was so needy and so important for us to find the humanity of the work that we do. And we work at scale. Brazil is a country that is very big. We have a presence in 1,000 cities. And finding this equilibrium was something that I directly connect to the process of the SVRI grants and the research that we've conducted in here. The SVRI, as Chichi mentioned, also brought us this concept of uptake and what we would do with the findings and with the processes. I think the most tangible and short-term impact is what we've done with the intervention that we conduct. So we're still service providers, we're still practitioners, but we've improved our intervention. We've improved it to a point that beneficiaries are more connected, are faster connected, have a better trained volunteer base, and we understand that their experience is being improved directly towards this. We have been able to articulate with peers and other decision makers here in Brazil in terms of improving the spectrum of where women are being supported by public services and other services as well. One of our peers also mentioned SVRI as a golden grant. I second that. I think that it became something for us. MAPA is a project within an organization, a bigger organization. And with the SVRI grants, which was the first dedicated grant to this project, we have been able to secure other fundings from other peers, be it in a national level here in Brazil, be it in an international level. MAPA is the first Latin American-based project to receive the Co-Impacts Gender Fund cohort. So it did put us into a next step, which I'm very, very proud of. And Chichi also mentions the importance to the field, and I see this all the time at the work of SVRI. We have been able to step out of our own dome of work, our own dome of intervention, into speaking about our work and understanding how it impacts and how the knowledge and the findings that we have now reflect and can reflect to the improvement of the field in general. So 2 weeks ago, we were featured in the Glass Wings International Conference on Mental Health to talk about the differences between urban mental health and rural mental health here in Brazil. And we will be in the Gender and Women's Studies Conference in Singapore in July, also talking about the findings of this research in itself. So I feel like as the social sector, we have limited resources always, and making sure that we cut to the chase in learning from others and learning through our own impact is the way that we have to actually consolidate and generate further impact, because we don't always have resources to distribute. So this is a brief introduction. I'm happy to continue talking and to hear questions.
No, and I can see there's a whole lot of interest in the chat box about the work that you're doing. Thanks a lot. You have essentially answered, most of the questions that I had lined up, so that's great as well. I'm not sure how we're doing with time. I think we may be a little bit over. I think so. I'll just ask one question then, and that is, what advice would you give, as someone who is has been an SVRI grantee? What advice would you give to potential applicants?
I would say that honesty is the best piece of advice whenever you're writing grant-making proposals, because we need to make sure that we're honest to the work that we're doing and we're honest to the work that we can deliver on. The SVRI can and had assisted us directly in improving our proposal and making sure that it was actually better than the one that we originally submitted, and that was very generous of them. And I would also say that be honest and generous with what you're thinking and how you make sure that this resource is not only for yourself, but for the beneficiaries that you're working for, or for the colleagues that you're dialoguing with. Make sure that you write a piece of structure that can actually interest and is relevant for other people to improve their works as well.
Thank you. I think that's such a wonderful answer. I know more and more in the field we're talking about kindness, and I think honesty really dovetails with that concept, and it really is true, because when we submit proposals we're trying to persuade, and sometimes that means that we are less than honest. So thank you for raising that. I know that we could go on talking for quite a bit, but I don't want to eat into Heidi's time. So I'm going to just really thank you, Enrica, for sharing with us and encouraging others to, really go ahead and apply for this grant. I'll hand back to you, Liz. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chichi, and thank you so much, Enrica, because I think you've been such a wonderful grantee partner, and the spin-offs of your work, because it's so important and so amazing. It's been wonderful, and it's great that you have all these new opportunities to be sharing globally the wonderful work of MAPA, and so we're so happy for you, and we love working with you and hope to continue to do so. We do have a question in the Q&A, and I just wonder if someone from the SVRI would be interesting to talk about it. There's a question that has come from anonymous attendee, welcome anonymous attendee, about the inclusion of sexual and reproductive health in the SVRI strategy and reproductive coercion. I'm going to just quickly jump in actually and just say it is included, and the SVRI Forum program, which will be launched in hopefully in the next few weeks, there is quite a number of abstracts on reproductive coercion. So it's not an exclusion of sexual and reproductive health rights. It is fundamentally important to the rights of women and girls having access to reproductive health and good reproductive health services. And of course, trying to integrate ways in which we can integrate violence against women and violence against children services into proper and good sexual and reproductive health services. So research on that is really important and valuable to us. Heidi and Chi-Chi, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I guess thank you. That's a really great question. I guess the first thing comes to mind is that, SGBB itself is really a key reproductive health issue.
Yeah.
And it means, a wide variety of things. And I think that sometimes it may be a challenge to be exhaustive, but it is really a wide umbrella term. And more reproductive coercion is being talked about, its importance and its linkage to other forms of intimate partner violence is recognized now. And so I just want to thank the person for raising this issue, but not to take the lack of mentioning it as meaning that it's not important.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to now hand over to Angelica to talk about this new call. Over to you, Angelica.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Titi for so clearly explaining the principles that guide the SVRI grant making, and to Enrique for your thoughtful insights into the challenges and opportunities of doing research in low and middle income countries. I will now proceed to give an overview of the guidelines of the SVRI research grant and the technicalities involved in applying for it. Firstly, I would like to reinforce what Liz and Titi have already mentioned. The SVRI aims to tip the scales when it comes to resources for research between high-income and low and middle-income countries in favor of low and middle-income countries. And we want to provide platforms where researchers from those settings can really showcase their work and impact public policy. And I also want to say that there is a great research happening in those settings, but it's just we don't know about it. So through this grant, what we want to do is really give a platform, promote inclusion and more diverse voices in discussions on violence against women and violence against children. And you will see these principles really translated into our guidelines. First of all, who is eligible to apply for our grant? Applicants should be affiliated with a recognized, legally constituted research institution or organization with existing research or programming capacity on violence against women and violence against children. And I think something very important, grants are for institutions and not for individuals. We receive quite a lot of queries related to individual applications to further studies, for instance, but actually that's not the nature of our grant. It actually goes to organizations. Where appropriate, involve partnerships between multiple organizations, for example, a local NGO, practice-based agency, academic institutions, and local government and academic institutions, for instance. So you can really play around with the consortium you want to form, and we really like actually groups of organizations presenting proposals. Preference, and this has come across also in the conversation already, will be given to proposals submitted and led by organizations based in low and middle income countries. Organizations or consortium can submit up to 2 proposals, but only 1 proposal can be funded or will be funded because we have limited resources, of course. Previous grantees of SVRI cannot be considered as principal applicants. Institutions that have an active SVRI grant may not apply, but of course former grantees can also be part of consortium. It's just that they won't get kind of another grant as a lead agency. Grant applications that are proposing work led by UN or other multilateral agencies will not be considered. However, these organizations can be part of the consortium as long as they are not the recipient of the grant, the fiscal agent. And of course, all projects under this call should focus on violence against women and or violence against children, prevention and or response, and in low and middle income countries. That's key too. And you will see at the end of the presentation a link where you can figure out if your country is or not a low and middle income country. What are we looking for? The nature of the projects we want to fund. Implementation science. We are interested in studies that evaluate how to effectively expand tested prevention and response interventions, and also qualitative studies that explore the effectiveness and process of creating change in prevention interventions, or the acceptability, impact, and process of change created by response interventions. Also, research projects that are either standalone projects or a component of a larger project that will guide efforts to effectively address or prevent violence against women and violence against children. Studies that address the intersection between violence against women and violence against children. Studies on how to integrate both programming into other sectoral work, for instance, in large infrastructure programs. Also, projects that develop innovative methods and tools for violence against women and or violence against children research. Secondary analysis of the existing data is also interesting for us. Research on under-researched or higher risk or vulnerable populations. Also, very importantly, and Tichi already mentioned it, all research must address a gap in the field and build on existing knowledge. And here I want to, of course, many of you might know, the SVRI and the Equality Institute conducted a very thorough and participatory process to identify research priorities in the field. And the result of that process is condensed in the Global Shared Research Agenda. So please do consult that document. There may be other relevant research themes in different contexts. So the JRSA is a guidance tool, but I think we believe it's very representative of what's happening in the field right now. I also wanted to tell you just briefly about what type of projects we have supported in the past, or we are currently supporting. So a new grantee in Palestine, for instance, will conduct research to build evidence on how the national referral system could be improved to become more responsive to the needs of women with disabilities who are subject to violence. In South Africa, a grantee will establish the relationship between childhood trajectories of exposure to violence and IPV, victimization and perpetration in adulthood, and pathways through which early life factors contribute to IPV, as well as exploring the life course approaches to prevent later IPV. We are also funding a project that will design, implement, and evaluate a psychopedagogical intervention to prevent child abuse, child sexual abuse among primary school children in Mexico using artificial intelligence. So you can see it's a very broad type of projects addressing different type of initiatives, implementation science, and very innovative also in the nature. Now going to the very practical things about what we can offer. The grants are between $40,000 to $100,000 US, and this time around they cannot be longer than 18 months in length, so between 12 to 18 months. So we basically provide funding for a very limited period of time for projects with clear, measurable outcomes. We require a budget for a period, again, between 12 to 18 months in US dollars and using the online application form. The budget should be a definitive line item budget for all direct costs. And there are also administrative costs or indirect included, but they cannot be more than 15% of the total cost. Proposals requesting more than the stipulated maximum will be rejected at the point of receipt. So really pay attention to the budget when you submit it. It is very important that you visit the website of Proposal Central and register well in advance so you understand what is involved in the submission process. We work with Proposal Central as a mentioned online system, and actually it can be a bit cumbersome at the beginning if you don't know the system. So really take time to get to know the system. Register, of course. Don't leave it till the last moment because you might have some glitches and that's not ideal. And every proposal must reach us by the 19th of July, midnight South African time. Every proposal must be submitted online in that date and time, and unfortunately, we do not accept proposals via email. Also, we receive a lot of queries during the application process or afterwards saying I couldn't send, I couldn't submit online, but unfortunately, we do not accept email proposals. So all this is contained in the guidelines, so I really encourage you to take them as soon as possible. You can also contact Proposal Center to clarify any doubts about the application process in the site or any technical glitches while uploading your application. They're extremely efficient, very responsive, so we're really happy to work with them. Now, how do we select the application? We use a very thorough process, very rigorous, multi-layered selection process. Once the deadline has closed, all proposals are scanned, reviewed by internal SVRI staff. The proposals that do not fulfill the basic eligibility criteria will be excluded at this stage. For instance, applications that are off-topic, they are not based in a low and middle-income country, exceed the project timeframes or the budget requirements, are submitted late, not submitted via the online application system. So that's the kind of first layer of review. It is really important, and I think Titi also mentioned, to provide a very clear and concise abstract. Proposals with well-written abstracts are more successful than proposals with poorly written abstracts because the step passes through the layers of review. The SVRI staff, along with the technical team, will undertake a more thorough second review of applications using a set criteria, and I will mention that in the next slide. Then a short list of between 20 to 30 proposals found eligible and technically solid will be prepared for final review by an external panel. The external international expert review committee is made up of representatives with technical expertise in the field or proposal review experience. And the participation in this panel is voluntary. And this panel is really very representative of our field. We are very grateful to have people with really a lot of knowledge and experience from all the regions of the world. So we really know what's happening in every setting right now. The results of the review process will be set within 5 to 6 months of the application. And this is something also that we come across a lot too in terms of queries. Due to our limited capacity, we can unfortunately not provide feedback to unsuccessful applicants. We just absolutely kind of, last year we had 345 proposals. It's really very beyond our means really to do this. How does the committee assess the proposal? So the committee will assess the proposal answering to a set of criteria that are also established in the guidelines. So I strongly recommend that you take them while you draft your proposal. Really take what is the committee going to be asking. So one first thing is overall merit. Will this project build evidence for violence against women and or violence against children intersections, prevention and response in low and middle income countries? How is the project designed? Is the design method sound, feasible and relevant to the questions being asked? What is the significance of this project? Will the project advance basic theoretical concepts, improve or enhance policy and practice in the field of prevention or response? How is the team composed? Is the training and experience of the project manager and the team members appropriate for the project or activity? Are the roles and responsibilities of all project partners clearly outlined in the proposal? Here is also very important. We want to see if this consortium, sometimes we have between researchers from high-income countries, low middle-income countries. What is the roles really? What is the power relationship here? Is it clearly who is doing what? And that also must be reflected in the budget. So we really need to understand this very well. So take your time to explain that. Ethical considerations, obviously. Will the project be conducted in a professional manner in accordance with the applicable international ethical guidelines? And of course, in the guidelines, you will find some key resources that you can consult. And last but not least, is the budget credible and aligned with the project methodology? Another important thing to comment here is that the committee tries to select applications from all the regions. So this shows you how competitive this process is. Here are some key links to guide you through your application process. These are kind of, it's in terms of a proposal central, our email address, all the guidelines are contained in this link here where it says SVRI documents and grant. And I just want to also mention that we are very happy to respond to all kinds of questions related to the application process and the guidelines. However, to maintain the fairness and transparency of the process, the SVRI staff cannot advise or review draft proposals. We think that's just unethical, basically. So we will not be able to engage on one-on-one consultations about proposals in progress. So I think this is all from me, Liz, and happy to respond to questions now and to see if we have questions from the audience in the chat.
Thank you so much, Angelica, and thanks for the overview. And thank you to all the participants for all the great questions. Angelica, there are a number of questions, and one is again from the anonymous attendee, and the anonymous attendee is wondering if the proposal must have a plan to solve or address the problem they're working on.
Yeah, well, yes, we are very kind of, and I think Titi mentioned we are we want research that is actionable. But of course, I think we cannot expect one proposal, and again, we have got little resources, very limited time. We cannot respond, to every problem, in that way. So we are contributing to the field. The key thing to me is the actionability of the research you want to implement, the studies you want to implement. But of course, it's a bit too much to ask for solutions to every problem. That maybe would be a bit too overambitious, but we are building on what has been done before.
So thanks, Angelica. There's a couple of questions around, do the projects have to explicitly address violence against women and violence against children? Is one favored over the other, and is it or the intersections of violence against women and violence against children?
That is broad. You can work on violence against women studies. You can work on violence against children, what is linked to also the violence against women intersection. So we are not prescriptive in terms of it has to be the intersection only. It has to be only on violence against women. That's not the case. Although in the case of violence against children, we're looking for the intersection, of course, with violence against women issues.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Angelica. Can an organisation doing violence against women work, this is from Marissa, partner with an individual researcher, or must all parties be a registered organisation?
No, that it's up to you how you build your consortiums. Again, the key thing is that we cannot have individuals getting a grant. So, but if organization thinks that it's important to have consultants or individual researchers on board, that's completely fine. And we will be watching, obviously, the CVs of the team members. Basically, that's what we want to see. The key thing here is the issue about organizations receive a grant, not individual.
Okay. So this is a group of researchers and faculty working and living in US, partnering with organizations in low and middle income countries. The research project will take place in low and middle income countries. Are there any guidelines for what percentage of budget should go to in-country versus the US?
No, we do not have, we don't have guidelines at all. But of course, we will watch really that there is equity. Obviously, there is not, and that really there is a power kind of, like a equal power in accessing resources. Of course, also in the budget. So, but we don't have particular guidelines. But we'll be watching that, obviously.
Would we consider proposals from researchers and government institutions to strengthen evidence and a monitoring and evaluation and learning component of a government program?
I think we will have to, again, it would be included, of course. Again, we promote, we give grants for research, not for M&E. But of course, if it's a combination of both, absolutely not a problem. But again, remember, this is not an M&E kind of type of grant, it's research. But yeah, I would say yes, in this case, yes. And we'll have to see it in more detail, obviously.
And I think we've answered this from Aitakin. Do you fund research that would test and adapt evidence-based interventions to prevent child abuse and neglect? So I think so, absolutely. Yes. Can graduate assistantship for a student who is part of a research project be included as part of the budget? No. Yeah. Okay.
I think it's as long as it doesn't go to kind of further individual studies. This is not kind of a scholarship type of grant, but it's part of a project that is run by an institution. Absolutely, it's possible.
Can a group of investigators, Angelica, organized towards a project apply? So it's a group of investigators within an existing project, I'm assuming. Is this correct, Leith? Also applies. So you've got an existing project. I'm assuming that's linked to an institution, and can you apply for a grant?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. You can complement grants, the grants with our grant, yes.
And Augustina just wants to know, do middle-income countries include upper middle-income countries? Yes, they do.
Yes,
So that's the
correct.
quick
And
answer.
that's a question. We have been receiving a lot of those. The only countries excluded in terms of setting is high-income countries.
Yeah.
Lower middle-income countries, whatever the subcategories are, yeah, welcome to apply, definitely. And I would really recommend that you take the most up-to-date classification of the World Bank. We provided a link also in the chat and in the guidelines, so you can really figure out what is the current status of your country.
There's a couple of questions, Angelica, if you don't mind me answering, just around what can go to what in terms of the budget. We believe that you are the best people to tell us what certain things cost and what are required. We don't have certain proportions of this should go to that. You are the best people to tell us. And you put the best budget to ensure that you can actually achieve what you need to achieve. There is an overheads cost. What is the cap of the overhead, Angelica?
15% is the maximum that you can have for kind of indirect, basically operational cost. And we also watch that very carefully, that there's kind of no double dipping and putting other indirect costs in the budget.
And then there's an interesting question around what kind of language is expected in the grant. Do we want lay people language, academic language?
I think it's a research proposal, so we expect kind of language that really understands the field, that really builds on that. So we expect certain level of language that is really respond to research needs and priorities, and show that you know the field basically.
And this is linked to the next question. Can grants go to providing services or conducting activities? No, we really want to building evidence and practice-based knowledge.
This is also, we get a lot of some types of proposal questions around that. It could be the piloting of an intervention. There could be some resources to do implementation, but the key resources will be going to the research, basically to the study.
So we have a few more questions. The slides will be shared afterwards online. Can you, as an individual, apply for a grant without being affiliated to an organization? No, you can't, unfortunately. And then the overhead is 10%. And then there was
the overhead is 15%. The overhead is 15%.
15%. 15%. Sorry, take that back. Can we please reiterate what Chi-Chi mentioned earlier about sexual and reproductive health? Is there an interest in the intersections between violence against women and reproductive health rights? Yeah. And we do have a proposal. We do have a proposal for format for people to follow. It's online. And then some interesting questions for you, Angelica. How many proposals finally will be awarded?
I think just looking at the latest years, we have been awarded with 7, 8 per year. So depending on our budget and the budget also submitted by the finalists, let's say, we then distribute. But I would say up to 9 is the maximum we can award per year.
I think, Angelica, I have reached to the end to the Q&A questions. There might have been one that I've missed. So knowledge can be produced through innovative ways like comics or illustrated books or videos.
I think that's an interesting one. We really like a knowledge translation. Again, we don't want when we talk with our grantees about your outputs, what is your research uptake plan? What are you going to do to communicate this? We love it if you have it in different ways. Could be a journal article, could be a policy brief. But if, for instance, if you're working with children, it would be interesting. What are you going to do to communicate your research to children through these comics or videos or whatever? So be as innovative as you can. I think we really like that. We like research for impact, and we like communication of research. So be creative there.
We also love peer-reviewed journal articles, but not at the cost of really ensuring your research is getting into what we really think is important to influence policy and practice. So the Ashna has asked one more really important question, and this will be the last question because I really don't want us to take time around what does a good proposal look like from Heidi. Do we fund all parts of the research budget? And if you want us to make revisions to the budget and then fund the project partially?
Absolutely. If we always negotiate in the end with every grant maker, we negotiate kind of budgets, And if you convince us we need more for this and that within what you were allocated, it's completely fine. We talk about that all the time with the grant.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you all for the really fantastic questions. And I'm going to now hand over to what we think is really going to be quite an exciting and new approach to the launch of the research grant call, is to talk to it's from Heidi to really tell us about what does a really interesting research proposal look like, and what do we need to do to make our research proposals fundable. While we're putting up the slides, there's one more question from Uwezo. One of the eligibility criteria is to give more change to NGO-based low and middle income countries. What we really want is not necessarily NGOs, they can be academic partners, practitioner, researcher partnerships, consortiums, but we really want the research to be led by folk in low and middle income countries. You can partner with high income country researchers, that's great, but we want our partners, we want to make sure that the research has been conceptualized, conceived, developed, implemented, and done by researchers based in low and middle income countries in partnership with whoever can make sure that your research is awesome and going to make a difference to the lives of women and girls on the ground. So thank you. Over to you, Heidi, and thank you everyone again.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for sticking around. The reason why we added the session this year round is that we found out that there is a way of grantsmanship and knowledge about how to write a winning grant that some people had and other people didn't have. But SVRI really wants to encourage everyone to try, if you have an innovative, good winning idea, to go for this grant and, and don't get stuck by, not having that knowledge. And we know that we have a lot of people who applied for the grant the first time, like Enrica said. And so this is a bit of a way of telling you a little bit about how a good grant looks like. It is targeted a lot around the SVRI grant, and it also follows the template it had last year. But obviously the whole knowledge can also be used for other kinds of grant applications to other funders. I just wanted to start with some hard facts, and that is that grants do get rejected, and regardless of whether it was a small grant or a big grant, it's always really painful because every time you put a lot of work into it, because every grant you submit needs to be as good and as perfect as possible for you. And it has happened to me a lot of times. Out of every grant I received, I did not receive 2 other grants. And it can be quite devastating sometimes, because a lot of things obviously depends on the grant, and sometimes you just really believe in the idea. So, but this is just to know you're not alone and don't give up. And the other thing is that Angelica mentioned really nicely, the only real deadlines are grant deadlines. This is what Laurie Heisey once said to me. And basically, as she said, if you submit later, it won't count. So really make sure you submit on time, and actually, as I will say later, submit slightly earlier, because things always go wrong. And that's the most awful thing that can happen to you, that you messed up the time differences and the time zones. But one of the things is, and also Angelica talked a little bit about what are the criteria, what are the themes, what are the eligibility criteria. You really have to find out whether this SVRI grant is the right grant for your idea, for your organization, for your research. And the way of doing that and learning that is actually really going through, obviously the eligibility criteria, going through all the information that is there. But what I always found was really helpful, and I actually do every time I apply, is to try and find out who got this grant beforehand. And SVRI is extremely open about this. It's on the website. I put it on the right-hand side up in the slides. To, like, for example, they say where they funded grants, who they gave the money to, who is the PI, and who are the partnering organizations, and what the work is about. And it gives you a very good flavor of what they were looking for in each year, because you will also see there is a real time trend in terms of the topic they found. And then potentially, one of the people who received the grant, and I don't want to say to all the 80 people now, please reach out to everyone who got a grant before, because people might not be too happy. But in some ways, it's really useful to talk to people who had a grant before, to have a look at applications that other people have done, to get a sense of how does a successful grant look like? What did they write? How did they make the connections? And how did they build up several storylines? And then, as I said already, pay really close attention to the call. Angelica had said in the first round, they actually check for eligibility. So if you don't meet these very hard eligibility criteria, you might be out very immediately, and your wonderful idea wouldn't have even been looked at. And it's things like check whether your institution already had an SVRI grant. If you're in a bigger university, for example, this might have happened without you knowing. And just make sure that you really meet all these criteria. And then really look at, is this grant the right thing? Does my topic really fit into that? And I thought the question was really good about the sexual reproductive health issues, because obviously there was some, it wasn't clear enough that this would be very welcome. But maybe if you work on gang violence, then potentially this is not the right grant for you unless you have a very clear gender component. So it's really assessing it according to that, because this is what reviewers will look for. And I'm reviewing a good of 100 grant proposals a year from very different organizations, the EU and research councils. And very often you have fantastic ideas, but they just don't fit the call, and they weren't written for the call and according to the categories they ask for. And that's a real shame very often. So how do you go about writing a grant application? This all seems very obvious, but it often isn't. And it's the one most important thing is that writing a grant really takes a lot of time, because it's not just a simple process of writing a proposal that takes time. It's also because you need to proofread it. You really should show it to other people. Show it to people who know the field very well, because this is a very subject-specific grant. So it should be shown to other people who know violence against women or violence against children, because these are also the people who are on these different stages of the review, and definitely on the last expert panel as well. And then it's really helpful to get the terminology right, and to be very clear and have everything written out clearly. And that often takes time. But also you have to read it very well, because funnily, as a reviewer, you immediately see all these spelling mistakes that when you're writing it yourself, after a while, you don't see it anymore. And things I therefore do is that I often do, I mean, as nearly everyone now, I write them on my computer on a Word document, and then I do different stages. I read it out aloud to me. Then Word now has this nice new function that Word reads it out to you. And when you hear it, you pick up a lot more mistakes and grammar issues and missing words. And then I print it out on paper. I actually read it on paper when you see a lot more mistakes. And then I read it out loud on the paper. So it's quite a process, but that's how you pick up a lot of the small mistakes. And then, as I said already before, technology features. I know someone who missed the grant deadline because she mixed up the European and the UK time by an hour. So really trying not to do that. And also systems tend to crash the hour just before the submission deadline, just because that's when everyone submits. So try to submit it half a day earlier, at least. As a kind of standard rule, at least not the 5 minutes beforehand, because just uploading the last document might take too long. And then, as also was already answered by Liz or Angelica in the end, SVRI might come back, and the panel might come back to you with some amendments. This also happens with some other grants. They are normally in your favor, I would argue, or they reflect some changes that would need to be made. It would never change the project completely, but it is often based on discussions that were had in the panel. Then really get advice from others, and this really is now about your idea. So we heard a lot about eligibility and all these issues, but now the real core about this is your idea. And the most important thing is to share your idea clearly and concisely, so that it's easy to understand for the people who review this grant. And it really helps for that process to happen, to talk about your idea through with all different types of people, ideally your colleagues, other researchers, but also family members and friends. And I know that often you feel a bit not ashamed, but a bit like very, because it's not yet developed, but actually talking about it helps you develop it, get different ideas and insights. And also not just your idea and the big question you have, but also how you want to approach it. What might be the right method? What might be the right approach within that method? And even try and show early drafts. Don't wait until the very end. And, you know, also once it is developed, show it to also senior people who have ideally experience in writing grants. And I also have to admit, I find it very painful to actually show some proposals to people, even when they're nearly ready, because I know these people and I feel more judged by them than I feel judged by this anonymous panel. But really, this is, you know, they're normally well-meaning. They really help you, and you really want the people you know to provide comments before you submit it to the people who make the decision. But mock interviews most horrible when they're your colleagues, I find. But even showing your proposal, every time I do this, I'm worried they come back to me and say like, Heidi, what a strange idea. So this is, it's very natural, but overcome it, because you want to win this. And so it's important to receive this constructive criticism. Your title, that's already a really important thing. This is the first thing reviewers will read and the panel will read. And ideally, the title shows very clearly what the study is about. And from reading the title, people already know what it is that you want to do. So it should be not too long. Often there are some criteria how long titles can be. And it should already be, you know, exciting, this kind of spark. And so it has to be a bit of catchy, but at the same time, it has to be very unambiguous as well. And try not to use abbreviations, like we all know VAC, VAX, or WAR, or IPV, but still try to write it out just to be on the safe side. Often we are too used to our acronyms by now, but other people might not be that used to it. And use, I would say, actually, because that question came up before as well, do use professional language and not be sloppy in your language. Also, again, because this is a project and not, for example, a paper, you don't have to use necessarily quotes in the title, and really keep it to the content. And this is actually quite similar to the abstract that you're writing. So every proposal, and this is now from the SVRI template for this grant, you will be asked to write a background section. So what is required in a background section? And that really is, you have to state out the current state of knowledge in the field. What is known and what is the problem? And by doing that in a broad way and narrowing down, you then should really go on to presenting what are the knowledge gaps, because this is what you want to later say, I will address. You might have preliminary data already from M&E, from other small surveys. So this is also the place to bring that in and say, you know, worldwide or in my country or the country of study, this is known. We already know this, but this already helps you then to identify a gap. And ideally end this background section already with a short sentence saying what your study will be doing based on the knowledge gaps that you identified. You don't have to address all the knowledge gaps. You can then also only pick out one, but that is fine. And I just gave examples from one of my successful grant applications for the state of the field, where you should establish the significance of your topic, like violence against women is widespread. It has health outcomes that are detrimental for women. You also might use this to define terminology. Obviously, this is a very specific grant, so most people know what IPV is, intimate partner violence, but it's still very good to state how you operationalize this topic, because it might come up later in the method, and then reviewers would look back into the background to do that. And you show that it's also a way of showing that you're aware of the literature in your field. Don't oversight and overdo it, but I think it's a very good point to show that you are very knowledgeable and you also know the country you want to be working in. You have to present the knowledge gaps, as I just said, and this is also showing that you're quite familiar with the topic. You know what is out there and where your study might fit in. So you explain what is missing about the topic in addition to what is known. but try to avoid, and sorry for the spelling mistake, extensive critique of previous studies. Obviously, in some ways, you do highlight that previous studies did X and Y and they didn't do Z, and this is why you do Z, but don't go on for too long about that. Just as, really focus on your work in some ways. And then quite importantly, what the study will be doing in a 1 or 2, 3 sentences, which lays out your research question and lays out really the field for that, and already says how your data and your study will fill these gaps. For the SVRI grant now, it's the background section. Actually, this is a bit of a replication, so I won't go through everything else again, but there also is a statement of need section, which again, where they mean is actually do state what are the gaps in knowledge and how you will address them, and where you can really focus on what your study will achieve, what gaps it will address. But try not to mention everything possible that you know about the topic. Really try to stay focused on laying the background for what you want to do. And one of the really important things, and it's a separate section in the SVRI template, is the aims and objectives of your study. And this is the really core thing. We talked about, Gigi talked in the beginning about, the innovation and what we really want, because with the SVRI grants, the field should be pushed forward. So this part is really important, and they should be really focused. An aim should not be too long, actually. So don't write an aim that goes over 5, 6, 7 lines and includes all the objectives in there. Write your big research question or your aim as the big question that it is, and then state the objectives under it. So it becomes very clear what your overall aim is that you want to achieve. The objectives, they should be quite well defined, because every objectives, all of them added together, will help you to answer your big research question, your big aim. And they also will help you to quantify the success afterwards. After you've conducted the study, you will be able to say whether you met these objectives. Again, they should ideally be very concise and clear. Sometimes, and this is more depending on the study methods that you need to answer your question, you can also include hypotheses. But ideally, don't just make them duplications then of the research questions and the objectives, because that's just a way of losing a lot of words. But just to illustrate this even better, when you answered all the objectives, you have answered the aim of your study. Or if you answered all the objectives can be translated into research questions. If you answered all these questions in your study that you set as your objectives, you will have answered your study aim. So we always tend to look very carefully about what are the research questions, regardless of whether you frame them as questions, objectives, etc. But the content of that must be there. The really important thing, I would say, is after the aims and objectives that we will look at are the method sections. And Enrica actually said really nicely that honesty is really important. And I immediately thought that when sometimes you read method sections of research proposals and you feel like something is missing. And very often when I reviewed proposals of friends, I said this is really unclear. Why didn't you state? And normally then the answer is because I wasn't that sure. So the thing is, try not to hide some things that can't be decided. Sometimes things can't be decided at that stage, but just be very open about that and say, we still need to find this out. It's part of the process, and only then can we determine the exact sample, for example. And that is fine. It's just like if the reviewers see that you're trying to hide something, it makes one suspicious, and you want to avoid that. But you can be open with things that are not known that will affect your design, and that is okay. So it's the honesty that's quite important, and that normally doesn't work against you. And it has to be very clear, basically, what it is that you want to do, and really focus on that section to be very clear about that, because the grant is funding research, so methods are important. And there also needs to be some justification on why this method versus another, why this method is the right method for this question. So what does a method section need to have? It needs to speak about the study design, the methods that are used, the setting, the population, the sample, what measurements are used, what analysis you're planning to use. Obviously, sometimes things can change, but you should have a kind of round plan in the beginning. And as was mentioned a couple of times by Chichi and others, ethics is really important in this grant, and it will be discussed with every proposal that is funded. So study setting really has to talk about where is this going to take place, who is the population, what is the population profile, what is the size of the sample. And again, qualitative, quantitative research has different sample size. This is completely fine. It just needs a good justification why this is the right sample size. Any other information you find important for the review panel to know, or the reviewers? And then sometimes you might want to add a justification on why this setting versus another, or why this population versus another. And in general, if you feel that people might not be familiar with your setting, then do provide more information around it, especially if it's information that is really important to understand the research question or the method used. What is also important already at this stage to know is that you have thought about who will be included and who won't be included, for what reasons, into the sample, how you think the sampling strategy design might work, what time frame you thought about the whole project will be finished, but especially if it involves field work, what are the dates for it, the anticipated dates at least, and how you're planning to contact and recruit participants, because that is not always easy and has huge implications. Then already give some information on the kind of tools that you will use and this study design in some ways, what kind of data you will rely on, if it's quantitative information on the variables you will use, what are your main outcomes, and why did you choose these outcomes versus other outcomes, the scale versus other scales. It needs some detail, but not too much, obviously. And in some cases also going into a bit around what analysis you are planning to do later on with the study, especially if you want to do some subgroup analysis and some stratification that might be useful. Ethical considerations, just because it's important, I will just reiterate it briefly again. It is not enough to state this has been reviewed or will be reviewed by X and Y review panel. We want to see, and SVRI wants to see, have you really thought about these ethical issues? Have you thought about the safety and well-being of your participants, and actually also your staff members who are dealing with these very difficult issues? What have you taken? What steps have you taken, or what, you know, standard operation procedures or other kind of issues, tools have you in place to make sure that this is really consistently adhered to? And it might also include things about data protection from participants and other things. So really quite important for us. There isn't a special ethics section, I think, in it, but it has to be in the methods or the theoretical framework at some point, and it will be really reviewed. Common mistakes often is that people put too much detail and then miss out on other things. It's always about the balance to provide all the necessary information in sufficient depth without missing out on some, because they are word limitations. What is really quite irritating is when people copy and paste other studies, method sections into their own without adapting them appropriately. So that's really something one shouldn't do. I have seen it, and it's very irritating because you spend a lot of time trying to understand it. But then also, and it kind of contradicts the too much detail, is to have too little detail. So essential information just needs to be there. Key details about the method need to be there. And I hope that the previous slides help to show what are the key details in some extent. And then I called it impact, but it's actually, it's the actionability. The other word that is more used here is you have to show what impact will this work have? How will it be actionable? And that relates to what the kind of outputs are. And I just put here the Medical Research Council in the UK's questions on impact that they have, because I thought they're really great summary of how do you reach people? How will you make sure that there's a sustainable impact on this? Even if it doesn't immediately address the needs of women, girls, and children, how will it on the long term make a difference? And I think we all recognize that not everything immediately will have make a difference, but you should still show how this will happen. And I think this is what relates to the question on videos and games, etc. In addition to peer-reviewed outputs, what will you do to disseminate these findings? And in some ways, really think about who will benefit from it, who are the end users of this work. The SVRI asked about a theoretical framework after the method section, and I think that's a very good point to make. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time about what is a theoretical framework or what is a conceptual framework as well, because in the violence against women field, we often, and children, actually in addition, sorry, we draw on a lot of different theories and we draw on a lot of different ideas about pathways and we try to bring them together. So just to put it in other words, conceptual frameworks and theoretical frameworks are things that allow you to move beyond descriptive, so just explaining what you see, into explaining how and why things are connected. Why does an intervention work? So that's more the theory of change. But also, why is alcohol use, for example, associated with violence? And how can we then, interrupt this association? And it helps you to give you an explanation set, basically, of what you see and how your questions and your data and everything kind of flows together. It might also help you when you're developing a survey tool or an interview guide to filter out questions that shouldn't be in that guide so that you can really focus on the core questions that should be in there. And it can really help you as a reference point in the methodology section and the results section later when you think about it. So just give you some ideas about how frameworks might look like. You always have an outcome, which often case here would be violence against women and girls or violence against children. And if you're looking at, for example, health risks associated with trafficking, you can already build up the main health risks that might be associated with your outcome. And then you might want to find proof about it, but you already have a certain idea in your head. So this helps you to kind of list them and put them up graphically. Again, this is very descriptive, just that this is linked to the other. One of our lovely questions, we have an ecological framework, which is a conceptual framework in the violence against women and violence against children field, where we put all the different risk factors on an individual, macro, micro, community relationship level. This is also a conceptual framework, but it helps you to think about all the risk factors you might want to be interested in. We also have causal frameworks that really tell us, why do we think, for example, does alcohol use lead to more intimate partner violence? And what are actually the factors that might mediate that causal relationship? We might have relational frameworks. So we for example, with mental health, is violence linked to mental health? So is mental health leading to violence? So that's another way how we can put it. Or why is, we know that there's violence against children and violence against women in the same household. So what is kind of explaining this link between the two of them without really saying what comes earlier and what comes later? How you build a conceptual framework, and I know this is very brief now, but basically when you know your research question, it's really helpful to just use a blank sheet of paper and write down your main outcome, and then think of everything that might come there without really looking into the literature, just based on your beliefs, your ideas, just on the top of your head, based on your knowledge. And then in the second row, actually find evidence for that in the literature, and that will help you to refine your framework. Sometimes you have existing frameworks that you can build on, and then you can use them for your study, critique them, expand them, but sometimes you have to build your own, and then this approach might be an easy forward step. Just coming to some writing skills, because very often reviewers, depending on different grant calls, they review and score 10 to 30 applications. So that's quite a lot of applications you have to read through. So your main task is to make life as easy as possible for them. So again, try to be really clear and precise. For people who English is not the first language, it's actually really great that the shorter your sentences, the better. You don't have to write complicated long sentences. They are hard to read. It's actually better to be really clear, short. And you can write short sentences. They're normally much easier to grasp. Try to play around a little bit with the formatting. I know there's very little space, but do write paragraphs to make spaces in between wherever possible. And as I said before, try to make as little grammar mistakes as possible, because grammar mistakes often might change some of the meaning and might make less clarity. Liz, I think, already mentioned, or Angelica, about the partners, and I think that's quite important. Often, at least in the beginning, when I started writing grant proposals, I felt that I do need people with big names on my grants. And in some cases, and with some funders, this is true, but not with this grant. So you don't necessarily need to have a big name on your budget. I think you can put them into advisory board if you feel that they're a real benefit. But the real question is, how is the partnership looking like? Is this an equal partnership? And for you as the lead organization for the grantors, do you trust them? Because in the end, you will have to work with them. So do you really enjoy working with them? Do you feel that this is a very good relationship? And do they really fit your proposal? Do they have the skills you need? And I think that's the most important question. And that kind of then shows that it's a really good partnership. And the other question, of course, is also whether they're capable of delivering, because one thing that the SVRI grant will look at is the proposal realistic? Is the relationship realistic? Is the partnership realistic? So this is my last slide, really just the top tips. And I hope I didn't put you off with all these things that are expected when writing a grant proposal. But the most important thing is that SVRI, no one can review a proposal we never got. So please do, if you have a great idea, give SVRI a chance to review it and to kind of, change your idea with it. I know some people asked whether they could get feedback and it wasn't possible. But the thing is that after a year, when you look at your proposal now, you will think slightly different, and it will improve every time, even just by your own your own look at it with some distance. What I really said, and the other thing is, there needs to be consistency between your aims, what you aim to do, what your methods are, and what your budget in the end also is, because they really need to be consistent. Budget was mentioned already. It is always looked at, especially the explanation of how it is spent, how fair it is distributed, whether it's distributed according to the methods. The other thing also I think is important, try not to pack too much into it, because you think that you are more likely to get it if you promise a zillion thousand things. If you have a very good idea and you have a very good strategy of how you might want to go about this and what you will deliver, that is fine. You don't need to do an additional qualitative study on the side and an additional video. Sorry, just to point that, I'll use that example. It's okay to really focus on your strong idea, because that might get a bit diluted if you're promising too many things. But really just show us that your ideas are worthy and they're exciting. And the other thing is also, you have to be more self-promotional than it might feel comfortable, because you want to sell your idea and your grant. So, and that is also okay to, state a little bit more than you normally would do in your normal life. So be confident and really convince those that your ideas are worth it. Yeah, so I'm sharing the same things that Angelica did, and thank you really a lot for bearing with me and listening to me.
Heidi, thank you so much. That was an incredible overview and session. Very quick, so we probably need to do it again and again and again. But thank you very much, and really thoughtful. And I loved all the top tips and the ideas of keeping our proposals short, concise, clear, building on the evidence, working in partnerships, how it's going to make a difference, all the things we love and care deeply about. We are now reaching the end. We have 2 minutes left. What I'd like to do is really just to give everybody, particularly our today's speakers, a big warm thanks and a round of applause. The big thanks are coming through on the chat. They're really saying how much we really appreciate it. All the thoughtful insights, the presentations and discussions. Chi-Chi, thank you for really being clear about the principles and what we like to see in proposals. Enrica, thanks for the insights around what it's like to be an SVRI grantee and offering your support to applicants. That is so generous of you. And people on the webinar, please do reach out to Enrica. She's incredibly wise and can give you such wisdom. Angelica, thank you for pulling this incredible event together with these great speakers and for being such a great grants manager. And people know that we do take your proposals very seriously. We want to see them. We review them thoughtfully. I also want to thank you, Heidi, for this incredible presentation on how to really think through a good proposal. It's so important, and I hope we can keep asking you to continue to do that for us because it's been brilliant. Morma, thank you for being a great producer and sharing your production skills with us. And I'd like to thank all the participants for joining us today. We cannot wait to read your proposals. And actually, perfect timing because I've just had load shedding. Thank you very much, everybody.
Everyone, and thanks so much, Titi, Heidi, and Rika. This was brilliant. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good day, good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Best wishes.
Great, great, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.